The first time I understood what the word disappointment meant, I wasn't reading it in a book. I was hearing it from my father. "Why can't you be like other kids?" It wasn't shouted. That would have been easier to ignore. It was said in that calm, tired voice, the kind that makes you feel like you've already failed before even trying. I was 9. At that age, you don't argue back, you don't question, you just absorb. Words don't hit you immediately. They sink slowly, settling somewhere deep inside, where they start shaping how you see yourself. And in my house, that word didn't come once. It came often. Sometimes it was about grades, sometimes about how I spoke, how I walked, how I didn't speak enough, or how I spoke too much. There was always something wrong, something unfinished, something not enough. "You're careless. You don't focus. You'll never survive like this." At first I tried. I really did. I stayed up late trying to fix mistakes no one else even noticed. I practiced speaking more confidently in front of a mirror. I rewrote homework pages just to make them look perfect. But perfection is a moving target when the person judging you never intended to be satisfied. So slowly I stopped trying as hard, not because I didn't care, but because I started believing them. My parents were respected in our town. People admired them. They were the kind of people who always seemed put together, always smiling outside, always ready with advice for others. If someone needed guidance, my parents were the first to step in. Such a perfect family, people would say. I used to wonder if they were talking about a different house, because inside ours, things were quieter. Colder. Love wasn't loud. It wasn't expressed. It was measured usually against expectations I never seemed to meet. And then came the night everything changed. It was a neighborhood gathering, one of those loud, cheerful evenings filled with food, laughter, and too many people talking at once. My parents loved events like that, not for the celebration, for the audience, or the blue shirt. My mother told me, brushing imaginary dust off my shoulder. "At least look presentable." I nodded, standing still as she adjusted me like I was part of the decoration. My father was already holding the camera. He always had it during gatherings, recording moments, capturing smiles, documenting what he liked to call memories. But I had learned something over time. The camera didn't capture truth. It captured performance. The night went on like any other. Guests laughed. Plates clinked, conversations overlapped. I stayed close, quiet, trying not to draw attention. That usually worked. Until it didn't. "Say something about your son," someone joked, pointing at me with a grin. It was harmless. Just one of those passing comments people make without thinking. But my father didn't ignore it. He smiled, wide, confident, and pulled me closer into the frame. "This one," he said, tilting the camera slightly toward my face. For a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Maybe he'd say something kind, something simple, something that felt like belonging. "He's our biggest disappointment." The words landed softly, but they echoed loudly. There was a pause, just a second too long. Some people laughed, unsure if it was a joke. Others looked away. A few exchanged glances, the kind that said, "Did he really just say that?" I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't even blink. Because right after that, my mother added calmly, almost casually, "We've tried everything with him. Nothing works." And just like that, it wasn't a joke anymore. It was a statement, a label, a truth. At least, their version of it. The camera stayed on me. I could feel it. That small red light blinking like it was recording not just my face, but my reaction. Maybe they expected me to cry. Maybe they wanted me to, but I didn't give them that. Instead, I stood there, still quiet, empty. Because in that moment, something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to change everything. The video didn't feel real at first. For a few days, it stayed exactly where moments like that usually die inside phones, shared between relatives, whispered about, and then forgotten. I told myself it would pass, that people would move on to something else, but I underestimated one thing. People don't forget labels, they repeat them. It started small. A classmate smirked at me during lunch. Another asked, "Hey, are you really that bad?" in a tone that sounded like curiosity but felt like judgment. Then someone showed me the video. I watched myself standing there, frozen, quiet, expressionless. as my parents smiled beside me like they had said something normal. I didn't look hurt. I looked empty. That bothered me more than their words. Within a week, the video had spread beyond family circles. Neighbors had seen it. Shopkeepers had seen it. People I didn't even know had opinions about me. Oh, that's the kid I overheard once at a store. The disappointment. It wasn't said loudly. It didn't need to be. School changed after that, not in obvious ways. Teachers didn't treat me differently. No one officially said anything, but there was a shift, a subtle one. The kind you feel in how people look at you, like they're already expecting less. And the strange thing was I started meeting those expectations. I stopped raising my hand, stopped trying to stand out, stopped caring if my work was good or not, because what was the point? When a story about you spreads far enough, people stop seeing your actions. They only see the version they've already accepted. At home, nothing changed. That was the worst part. No apology, no acknowledgement, not even a mention of that night. It was like it had never happened, except it had. For me, it replayed constantly. For them, it was just another moment. One night, I was sitting in my room, staring at a half-finished assignment, when I heard their voices from the other side of the door. They didn't know I was there. He's getting worse, my father said. He was never good to begin with, my mother replied. There was a pause, then came the sentence that stayed with me longer than anything else. At least now, people know the truth. The truth. I sat there, staring at the page in front of me, those words echoing in my head, because something about them didn't sit right. Not anger, not even sadness, just resistance. For the first time, I questioned it. What truth? Their truth. Or mine. That night, something shifted, not in a dramatic way, no sudden burst of motivation, no emotional breakdown. Just a quiet decision, a small one, but real. I picked up my pen and finished the assignment, not perfectly, not impressively, just properly. For me, that became a pattern, small actions, quiet changes. I started studying when no one asked me to. Late at night, when the house was silent and expectations didn't exist, I watched tutorials, practiced skills, made mistakes, many of them, but this time, they didn't feel like proof of failure. They felt like progress. And for the first time in years, I wasn't doing it to earn approval. I was doing it because I wanted to understand what I was actually capable of. Days turned into months, months into years. On the outside, nothing looked different. I was still quiet. Still unnoticed, still to most people the same disappointment they had seen in that video, but inside something was growing. Confidence slowly forming, not loud, not visible, but steady. Meanwhile, my parents continued their performance. Smiles at gatherings, advice to others, stories about discipline and success, but I started noticing things I hadn't before. Inconsistencies, the way their words didn't always match reality, the way they talked about me versus how little they actually knew about my life. Cracks, small ones, but enough. I didn't confront them, not yet, because I understood something important. Truth doesn't need to be forced. It needs to be revealed, and I was patient. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to escape the label they gave me. I was outgrowing it quietly, carefully, completely. They thought the story had already been told. They thought everyone had seen who I was. But they had only seen one moment, one version, one narrative. By the time the invitation came, I almost ignored it. It was an email, simple, formal, easy to dismiss. A local youth event focused on growth and resilience. They wanted speakers. People with stories. I read it twice, then a third time. At the bottom, one line stood out. We believe your journey could inspire others. For a moment, I wondered if they had the wrong person. Then I realized something. They didn't. Years had passed since that video. On the surface, my life still looked quiet, ordinary. I hadn't become famous. I hadn't done anything dramatic enough to erase the label people had attached to me. But I had built something, skill by skill, step by step. I had earned small recognitions, academic achievements, a few local acknowledgments, things that didn't make noise but carried weight. Enough for someone to notice, enough for this invitation. The day of the event felt strangely familiar. Same kind of crowd, same kind of energy, laughter, conversations, people dressed their best, and, of course, cameras. For a brief second, I hesitated at the entrance, not out of fear, but memory, because the last time I stood in a place like this, I wasn't seen as a speaker. I was the example, the wrong one. They are expecting you, someone said, guiding me inside. I nodded, my expression calm. Inside, everything felt different, not because the place had changed, but because I saw them before they saw me. My parents sitting among the audience, perfect posture, familiar smiles, the same image they had always presented to the world. For a moment something inside me tightened, not anger, not fear, just the weight of everything that had never been said. Next, we have someone whose journey reflects resilience in its quietest form. My name was called. The room clapped politely. I walked to the stage, steady, measured, present. The lights felt warm, not blinding. The microphone didn't shake in my hands. I looked at the crowd, at familiar faces, at strangers, at them. Then I began. I used to believe that silence meant weakness. I said, my voice was calm, clear, but sometimes silence is where change begins. The room grew still. I spoke about struggle, not in dramatic terms but in honest ones, about growing up unheard, about trying to meet expectations that kept shifting, about the quiet damage words can do when they're repeated enough times. People listened, really listened. No distractions, no whispers, just attention. Then I paused, just long enough. Some of you might remember a video of me from a few years ago. A ripple moved through the crowd. Subtle but real, I was called a disappointment. I continued, publicly. I didn't rush the words. I let them sit. Back then, I didn't defend myself. I glanced briefly toward the audience, toward my parents. They told their version of the truth, I said, and for a long time I believed it was the only one that mattered. The room felt heavier now. Not uncomfortable, just aware, but here's something I learned. I continued. Truth isn't always loud, and it isn't always immediate. I reached for the remote beside me. A screen behind lit up, not with dramatic accusations, not with anger, but with moments, clips, messages. Fragments of time, patterns, conversations where effort was ignored, achievements dismissed, words repeated again and again until they became identity. Not exaggerated, not edited for sympathy, just real. No one spoke, no one moved, because this wasn't entertainment. It was clarity. I'm not sharing this to blame. I said, my voice steady. I'm sharing this because stories matter, and when only one side is told, it becomes a label. I paused again. But labels aren't truth. I stepped slightly away from the podium. For years, I lived inside a word that wasn't mine. I said, a word given to me in a moment that didn't define me, but almost did. The silence in the room wasn't empty anymore. It was understanding, and the hardest part, I added softly, wasn't proving them wrong. I looked out at the crowd one more time. It was learning to see myself without their voice in my head. When I finished, I didn't expect applause. But it came anyway, not loud, not explosive, but real. The applause didn't last long, but what followed mattered more. Silence, not the empty kind. I had grown up, with the kind filled with judgment and unspoken disappointment. This silence was different. It was heavy with realization. As I stepped off the stage, people didn't rush toward me immediately. They stayed where they were, processing. You could see it in their faces, the shift. The same people who had once looked at me with quiet pity were now looking at me with something else. Understanding, maybe even respect. Then it started, slowly. One person approached me, then another. I didn't know, someone said, I'm sorry. Another added, not dramatic apologies, not loud declarations. Just simple words, but they carried weight, because they weren't for show. They were real. I nodded, accepting them. Not because I needed validation anymore, but because I understood something now. People believe what they're shown. And for years they had only been shown one side. Across the room I saw my parents. They hadn't moved. No smiles now, no confident posture, just stillness. For the first time in my life, they didn't look in control. They looked uncertain. That was new. I didn't go to them immediately. Instead, I stayed where I was, speaking to those who came forward, answering questions, listening to others share their own quiet struggles. Because this moment, it wasn't just about me anymore, it was bigger than that. Eventually, the crowd thinned. The noise softened, and what remained was inevitable. You had no right. My father's voice came from behind me. I turned. They were standing there now, closer, but not closer in the way a family should be. Closer like strangers forced into the same space. You humiliated us in front of everyone, he continued, his tone controlled, but not calm. My mother didn't speak at first. She just looked at me, not with anger, not even with disappointment, but something unfamiliar, something closer to confusion. I held his gaze. For once. I didn't feel smaller. No, I said quietly, I didn't humiliate you. A pause. I told the truth. The words didn't come out sharp. They didn't need to, because they weren't meant to hurt. They were meant to be final. My father scoffed lightly. You think showing private matters to the public makes you right. I shook my head slightly. You made it public first. That landed. I could see it, not as anger, but as recognition, a memory he couldn't deny. My mother finally spoke. You could have talked to us, she said, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. There was no accusation in it, just something fragile. I looked at her, really looked, and for a moment I saw it. The gap between who they thought they were and what they had actually done. You didn't, I replied. Silence again, but this time it was between us. I didn't wait for a response. Because I wasn't there to argue, I wasn't there to win. That part was already over. As I turned to leave, my father called out once more. So what now? He asked. You think this changes anything? I paused, just for a second, then I looked back. It already has. And it had. In the days that followed, the shift became undeniable. People stopped repeating that word. Disappointment, it disappeared, not because I demanded it, but because it no longer fit. The same video that once defined me lost its power. Because now there was context, there was truth, there was another side, and my parents, their image didn't shatter overnight. Reputations rarely do, but something changed. People listened differently, questioned more, believed less blindly. Not because I destroyed them, but because I revealed something real. That was the part I hadn't expected. I thought revenge would feel loud, satisfying, sharp, but it didn't. It felt quiet, like a weight lifting. Like a door finally opening. I didn't feel anger anymore, not even resentment, just distance and clarity. They had given me a label years ago, one word, one moment, one version of me, and I spent years trying to escape it, trying to prove it wrong, trying to rewrite it, but in the end, I didn't need to fight it. I just needed to outgrow it. Because the strongest kind of revenge isn't destruction. It isn't shouting louder. It isn't making others feel what you felt. It's becoming someone their words can no longer define. They called me a disappointment, in front of everyone, and in front of that same world, I became someone they could never speak for again.